So welcome to the Silicon Valley Leaders Symposium. My name is Nicole Komodo, and I'm chair of the Mechanical Engineering Department here at San Jose State University. If you are struggling to find a seat, we've got one in front, and there's an overflow room in 192 as well. Today I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Mike Palmer, who's the Executive Vice President and Chief Product Officer at Veritas Technologies. Mr. Palmer earned a bachelor's degree in developmental biology from the University of Rochester, New York in 1996, and he's held several leadership positions in startups and Fortune 500 companies. He spent 9 years at Verizon as a vice president and general manager of cloud information technology solutions and security. He also worked in global engineering, product strategy, and alliances, and served as chief marketing officer. In 2014, Mr. Palmer moved on to Seagate Technologies, where he was Senior VP and General Manager of the Cloud Services Business Unit. He joined Veritas in February of 2016 as its Senior Vice President and General Manager of Veritas' Solutions for Data Insight and Orchestration Organization. In this role, he drove the strategic vision for bringing Veritas information availability and insight solutions to the market. As of October 2016, in his new role as Chief Product Officer, he's responsible for driving Veritas' overall product direction, strategy, and organization. So once again, please help me welcome Mr. Mike Palmer, the Executive VP and Chief Products Officer at Veritas.
Thank you. I got to work on the excitement of that resume. That was kind of boring. There's a seat up here, by the way. I was just telling, there's a great commercial, if you've ever seen one, where there's a whole audience full of like a biker gangs, and then there are two seats open in the middle, and these couples come in, and they systematically walk out, and they walk out, and they walk out, and eventually two sit down, and all the bikers jump up and crack open a beer and congratulate them for having the courage to sit in those two seats. In your case, there's a seat right there and one back there. I'll just let you know. Okay, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm usually the youngest person in everything I do. No, I'm the oldest. Which mystifies me that I'm standing here at all. But having said that, I was asked to talk about two things. I'm pretty informal, as you probably can tell already from my presentation style. So if you want to ask me a question or have a comment, feel free to raise your hand. Don't wait to the end. I was asked to talk about two things. One was, how did I get here? And I do reflect on that from time to time. And where am I? And then secondly, what are thoughts about things that are going on in the industry? And I work in the software industry today. And what does that imply for you? Like, what are ideas? What are things that you should be thinking about from my standpoint in terms of jobs or companies or technology trends or business ideas? I have the history and the pleasure currently working with a lot of VCs and a lot of private equity companies who invest. So I'll give you thoughts. They're not worth anything, but I'll give them to you for free. Now, just kind of going to the point of this is not so much career advice, this is a little bit more life advice. I like to start with this slide. All right, so you guys are young enough that you should know who Mike Tyson is, mostly from like the Hangover movie, maybe not from watching his live boxing matches, but Mike Tyson, right, he had boxing matches that would last 25 seconds. It was just crazy. But he had this quote, right, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And I use this quote all the time, and I think it's relevant, it's probably more relevant for you than it is for almost anybody else that I remind of this quote. Because while you're sitting here and you're going to school and you're getting a degree, and you kind of know you need to do that, because it's rare the person that gets to do great things without taking the step, I think it's often implied that what you're doing right now has some relationship with what you'll be doing 20 years from now. And I'm here to tell you that it almost has no relationship to that. Okay? You asked me earlier, like, I had a developmental bio degree. Why? Because I had no freaking clue what I was doing. My mom told me I should go to med school. Right, back in the late 1890s, Jesus, feels like that, 1980s. Doctors made a lot of money. They don't as much today, but that was like where you wanted to be. And I'm from like a small place in upstate New York that was mostly buried in snow all the time. And that looked like a great future, and the only way to get there was to take a science degree, and that was like the path. You got on the path. Well, I sort of decided that was not a path that I wanted to be on, and all of a sudden here I'm sitting with this developmental bio degree, and what am I going to do with that? And then I got a Spanish literature degree because my grandmother is Cuban and I speak Spanish as well, but I don't know what you do with a Spanish literature degree. Then I got a public policy certificate because I took my 4 years in college and they gave me a free year after that, and I was like, well, I'm going to stay here because I still have no idea. So I took a 5th year in college, none of which was really good for my liver. And then after college, I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And I had these 3 sort of non-related experiences. And I decided I had learned enough to teach something. And I joined a program called Teach for America. If you're not familiar with it, it's, I think, one of the best run, most influential nonprofit organizations in the US. That's what brought me to California. I taught physics to ESL students. And I would assume that there are quite a few ESL or former ESL students in the room. It was an amazing experience. I will tell you that if you want to learn how to be successful working, if you can survive being a teacher in high school for 2 years, the rest is easy. And primarily because if you can teach a high schooler at 2 o'clock in the afternoon physics in a language that they barely speak, after being at school for 7 hours on a Thursday afternoon, you can hold anybody's attention for any period of time. I taught it in San Jose. It was physics. I had to go between classes to get a bucket of water and all the other stuff. I had my computer stolen. It was an amazing sort of like life learning experience. It was amazing. But you would also notice that it still has absolutely no relationship to what I'm doing today, because even by the end of that 2 years, which is the commitment, I still had no idea what I was doing. And by now, I'm in my 20s and I'm really deep in debt and I kind of have to work. And I take kind of that first leap. And the first real leap was, well, what do you do when you don't know anything? Well, you go into consulting. That's the answer. And so I worked at Anderson Consulting. And what did I do? I coded. So you're probably not doing this today, but I coded C, I coded Perl, I coded Java. In fact, I work for the guy today. Does anyone know J2EE platforms, kind of the legacy J2EE platforms? WebLogic? Any CS degrees people in here? No WebLogic? WebLogic, ATG, WebSphere, these were the first platforms that came out that pre-installed Java libraries, and they gave you connection pooling to databases and to web servers, and they kind of took all this stuff and abstracted the operating systems. And one of the gentlemen that pushed this forward eventually sold WebLogic to Oracle, where it's still a multi-billion-dollar business today, is Bill Coleman, and I work for him. And we were working on those platforms building e-commerce sites. Well, I should say before that, Anderson Consulting learned that, decided that consulting is not really a career, this is late 1990s, this is like the original startup time, right? The first wave, when e-commerce sites came into being, where you go to bestbuy.com, we built that site. AmericanAirlines.com, built that site. Sony, Louis Vuitton. I could go on a long list. We were kind of originating the first Java-based, internet-based e-commerce. And that was super exciting. Back then, if you had a heartbeat, you could run an organization because there was no unemployment, like zero. If you graduated from college and you wanted to work, you had a job in like T-minus 4 hours. If you worked at the same job for a year, you were an executive vice president. I mean, this was the day to sort of, it was battlefield surgery because no one was there to train you. You had to learn it. But you learned everything. You learned operations, you learned technology, you learned management and leadership, and you learned sales, you learned marketing. And while I was doing all that learning, we went bankrupt. And in a spectacular fashion, by the way. When I say bankrupt, and I wish and do not wish this experience on you. When I say bankrupt, I showed up one day, 3 months after getting engaged, and telling all my wife's Swedish, telling all my conservative friends back in Sweden how I was going to be a gazillionaire and life was great. 3 months later, we were bankrupt. People looted the office, stole the computers. I mean, it was crazy. I happened to be running half the company at the time, and that half of the company was an annuity business, which means as opposed to doing projects that ended, these customers, we hosted their systems, like what you would know as sort of data center business. And those customers needed help. I mean, we went bankrupt, people walked away. They still had real businesses that were running in our data center. So we decided to work for free. We took those customers and made a deal with another company, and the deal was, and by the way, again, this is a time that now there's no employment, right? Every business is going out of business at this point around 2001. If you guys know the dot bomb, this was dot bomb. Made a deal and said, if you can bring these customers to our company, we will give you a $1-for-$1 trade for your salaries. So for every dollar that comes over, it'll be $1 to pay your salary, and if you move enough revenue over to us to pay your salaries, we'll hire you. And we did that. And that company, we thought was running out of cash, worked there for 4 years, did kind of big things, and then fortuitously we sold that company. I kind of 1 for 2 when it comes to bankrupt and kind of hit it. And that brought me to Verizon. Verizon, and I'm going to show you a slide in a second, but I went to Verizon. I ran engineering. I got to run marketing. I ran all the product portfolio. I ran the Internet of Things portfolio. I ran landline networking. I did the first deal with Netflix. By the way, I only say these things not as bragging. I had no plan to do any one of these things. This is just what happened. Obviously, went to Seagate after you for you folks that think about thermodynamics and how to manage sort of disk speeds and disk density. We worked in that space and obviously working in software now. And the net of this was, and I'll show you this in a second. The net of this was this: plan, prepare, perform. Planning is a really nice idea that is not particularly useful. Okay, it makes you feel good. It gives the illusion of control. You can kind of a pole star and go toward it, but the reality is it's about preparation and performance. And if there's one thing that I will tell you for the next few slides, and I only have like 6 because I don't like doing slides, is it's in the new world, in the world that I'm working in today, diversity is what is important. And when I say diversity, it's not whether you're an engineer, and it's not whether you're a data scientist. It's not whether you can do UX or marketing. You have to do all of those things. If you do one of those things, you won't have a great career. You will be pigeonholed into a job, while people that have rotated their assignments and rotated their experiences through all those different functions bring them together to create great things, to create great products. And one of the things that I titled this presentation, Removing Friction, because one of the things that you find when you go through all these experiences is that really the world's successful businesses are about removing friction. And by the way, it's one of the skills that I think folks in your generation do a little bit better than we do because we often just came to accept it. So if you think about who removes friction today, think about Uber, how difficult it was, you probably don't even know, to get a cab 5 years ago. San Francisco had the highest cost of securing a taxi, had the highest cost per mile of any taxi service in the United States. You would call, they wouldn't come. You didn't know where they were. They were rude, dirty. I mean, it was a horrible experience. All kinds of friction in that experience. Uber changed that. Airbnb changed that. In general, software removes friction, which is why I'm in that industry now. But you really only notice these things when you think about the user experience. Where did they buy this? What did they want as an outcome? How did they pay for it? What are their other alternatives? You work in marketing, you work in sales, you work in engineering, you start to learn those lessons. So my first piece of career advice is not to have a career, it is to prepare. Prepare by having different skill sets and roll with it. Because lots of opportunities will present themselves to you, and maybe I sound a little bit like your mom or dad, they always talk about keeping doors open. But doors open really are about having lots of different diverse skills. So you're sitting here getting your engineering degrees, speak other languages, learn how to do marketing, learn user experience. Companies are craving those skill sets. I have about 3,000 engineers that work on my team today. Sub 1% of them can create a product that customers enjoy using. They were never trained how to think from the user's standpoint. So prepare and perform is far more important than planning because you can have a plan, but it goes out with the first punch. Now, these people also thought they planned, and they missed big, like really big. And this happened like 2 days ago, right? This is an astounding, I'm going to pull something else up here. This is an astounding thing. This is data science, by the way. The guy that is most famous for working in this space, his name is Nate Silver. Nate Silver's predicted the outcome of the elections for the past few. And he gave Donald Trump a 35% chance of winning. 35%. That is the state of data science today. And I'm going to link this to a little bit later because if that's good, there's a lot of friction in that space. If you had a 35% chance of living on your way home today by taking your car, you'd walk. So there's a lot of friction here. They had a plan. The plan doesn't work. And what happens in these situations is they get very focused. And I say this to you especially as an engineering team. These folks get very, very focused on what they think is the way to measure something. And they either are very old school. They pick up the phone, they call you, you answer a question. Well, that presumes a few different things about you already. What's the likelihood that they're calling you on a phone that you'll answer? I don't answer numbers that I don't recognize on my mobile phone. I don't know if you guys do. But that means there are a whole bunch of you that never get called for this. You are excluded from the cohort that they're taking their predictions from. But they're convinced, because they've created these models, they're convinced that they're the right models. So this focus is a dangerous thing. I was going to show you this video. If you've seen this before, by the way, I would appreciate that you not mention anything to anyone else. But it's an experiment that was done in 1999, and it's illustrative of, let me do this before I give it away. It's illustrative of what happens to most of us just from a human nature perspective. And so I'm going to give you the setup to this. Your job when you watch this is to, and there's a right and wrong answer here, so there's a little bit of a competitive requirement. See, this will always happen. Is there a Wi-Fi in here that I just got disconnected from? Is it a guest network? Oh, okay, I've got another way to do it.
If you want, we can just put it up on this.
Here's the other lesson, don't do demos. I got it. Okay. Your job
all your accounts for an up-to-date look at
is
your
to-
cash flow and monthly savings.
Your job is to count the number of passes, and there's a right and wrong answer,
and review
and I'll give you a hint, about
index.
50% of the people get it
Combine
right. You ready? All you have to do is count the number of passes. If you have seen this already,
The players wearing white pass the ball.
not bounces. They don't count, just passes. At the end, we'll do a little tally, and I'll get out of your way here in a second. But this is the kind of focus you need if you're going to be working in some of these spaces, like kind of the data science spaces. Because if you're not able to kind of focus and count the passes, then how are you going to be successful? So how many more do we? Probably about 5 more seconds. Okay, how many?
The correct answer is
12
16
passes?
Did you spot the gorilla?
I said it had to be in the air, not a bounce. So how many? 16 passes? Okay. What did you notice about the video? 50% of the people that watch that video do not see the gorilla. The gorilla literally goes like this, just so and I bet you, half of you that won't admit it, did not see the gorilla. And the gorilla goes like this. Just like that. 50%. And it's done consistently year after year. 50% of the people miss the gorilla. So I show this to you because there's a little bit of life in that. You know, if you get really focused on the thing that you think you do well, or the way that you choose to view life, or the skill that you have, you try to take that skill and you try to apply it to every situation that you walk into. And the reality is, life changes around you. When I graduated from school, 1996, there was an internet, but there was no e-commerce. So you just, you kind of took your traditional paths. You tried to go down the doctor, lawyer path, but here comes the internet. Let's try that. I'm Dev Bio grad. Am I going to do anything there? No, let's learn to code a little bit. Okay, great. That explodes. learn some skills there. What do you do next? Wireless. Wireless networking is amazing. That removed a ton of friction. Think about having to have a tethered phone. You'll never even know what that's like. But boom, you hop into that space. Rise of online video. How do you deal with that? Do you know that Netflix, in 2 years, I ran the landline network at Verizon and all the what are called interconnects, how that network works at the other network in the world. In 2 years, Netflix went from 0% of the capacity of our US-based network to 45%. So think about that. 45% of the billions of dollars that Verizon was spending to kind of create capacity so that you could do things in your house was all going to just Netflix, consume Netflix. And Netflix didn't pay us any money at all. Think about how that overturns like the economics of the entire business of networking and the internet. Just came out of nowhere. So it's not about the plan. There was no plan for that. There was just, how do you assess this? Like, how do you deal with things like that? So one of the things that I talk to folks about a lot then is, and again, and I love my engineers, by the way, so I'm kind of more emphatic with my advice here, is that take fewer big bets. Take lots of small bets. So I put, everyone knows who Babe Ruth is, right? Baseball player. Babe Ruth was well known for hitting the most home runs in Major League Baseball and held that record for many, many years. There's a little known fact about Babe Ruth, though. He also was the strikeout leader. So Babe Ruth doesn't look back on his career, didn't look back on his career and think about all of his strikeouts. He thought about all his home runs, and so did everybody else, right? So he went up there and said, I'm going to try a lot, and I'm going to fail a lot, but I'm going to succeed a lot. Even if I succeed less than I fail, which he did, he's still one of the best baseball players to ever play the game. So how do we translate that lesson? How do you go after your life and say, well, am I all in on engineering and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to either program or I'm going to be I'm working in a structural engineering thing, I'm going to go into architecture, whatever, and that's it, that's what I'm going to be? Or do you think, well, how can I apply that skill at the same time maybe learning another one? I'm going to learn a new industry, I'm going to apply this skill, I'm going to learn that new industry, maybe I'll pivot completely out of that skill. The folks that I work with, including myself, started with engineering and do nothing with engineering anymore. I wouldn't even touch a keyboard, by the way. It would be a disaster. But think about this. This is the model that most companies are employing today. It's the model that companies that are successful over the long term employ. The companies that have failed to do that and really diversify ultimately run a long-term risk. There is a company in the Valley today that, and this is just personal opinion, I play a game with my daughter. It's called Long Short, right, from an investor standpoint. So I have two girls. One is, it's actually her birthday is today. She's 7. And the other one is 10. And so we ask them, I give them a company name, long or short. Do you invest or do you short? Short meaning, of course, that you think the value of the company is going to decrease over time. And her answer on Apple was fascinating. And we have like 4 iPads, like 5 different iPhones, computers. I mean, the house is full of Apple stuff, right? And she shorts Apple. She shorted Apple 2 years ago. And why? We only have one product. She's like, how many of these products can I buy? And once I have a phone and an iPad, what am I buying more from this? I'm done with them. Amazon, she's so long on Amazon, it's like the company that I don't have enough quarters that she could go invest in Amazon and make her satisfied. Why? Because first of all, it's a limitless selection of things. They are a platform. They're not a product. They've created tons of small bets, and those small bets were on all of us. As suppliers, by the way, the bet was, if I create an interaction between a consumer and a business, then I don't take the risk of the business. And I don't even have to know the consumer. All I really have to do is connect the two. And then, of course, they did get really good at knowing the consumer, and then they parlayed that into more personalized marketing and a bunch of other products like cloud computing, et cetera. But they diversified, and they created that diversity. Uber's the same way. Do you know Uber's secret to business, the only thing they focus on? Does anyone know? They have one metric that they care about more than any other metric, and the pricing and everything's designed around this one thing. Wrong. They don't care about their customers at all, I don't think. Honestly. What's that? Not number of rides.
Number of users or employees?
Say it again?
Number of employers, how many employees they have?
Well, they have no employees, and that's a separate topic, by the way. The courts are trying to decide whether they in fact do.
Users of the Uber, the part of Uber.
Which part?
The drivers.
The drivers. That's the only thing they care about. They care about the number. In fact, it's a little bit more specific, but that's the right answer. The right answer is they care about the number of drivers because they want to reduce the friction between the driver and the passenger. And the only way to do that is to make sure that there are tons and tons of drivers available. So their philosophy has always been, if I click the button and a driver shows up and I know a driver's going to be there in less than 1 minute, that's the only way I'll ever go anywhere anymore. So surge pricing is about encouraging drivers to get on the road so that they're only 1 minute away from you all the time.
Yeah, so that's why they tell you, oh, we're going to give you 300 more of every instead of
They will do anything to get drivers, which is why this employee thing, because these, by the way, these drivers are all temporary. They're not employed by Uber, and the courts are trying to decide whether they really are employees. This will change their business model significantly. But it's all about supply. Airbnb looked at Uber and did the same thing. Airbnb is all about supply. They just want to have more apartments, more houses. But the point there is they did a couple of things really well. They took very little risk. They created a platform-based strategy to go find suppliers and connect them with consumers. They deployed very little capital, while they took a lot in. Right? They have a mobile application. They send you a phone. Verizon supplies phones, and they put them in a car. Go for it. As opposed to these huge risks that companies used to take, where they would build massive infrastructures and really hope that they hit the business model the right way. That's kind of the future, and this is what software enables. So as you are looking for jobs, I think one of the things that I'd be thinking of, things that I do think about, are which one of these two is the company you're going to? Is it a company that can learn from its customers and pivot? Or is it one that is spending 4 years to get a product to market, spending a lot of money in the process, very little real testing, understanding about what the experience is and whether it's compelling enough, and then launching? Now, this is the worst IPO year in the United States since 2008, which is a little known fact. There's been almost no IPO business, which is to the chagrin of quite a number of banking friends that I have. But if you look at all these places where you can put your money, look what keeps winning. If you're an investor, I go back to my last point, you're kind of in, right? I often talk about, do you know what the analogy of the chicken and the pig at breakfast? You know, the chicken's kind of half in, but the pig's dead. So from a software perspective, you can be a little bit of a chicken because you can watch your companies change. You can put experiences out into the market and you can change them, which is why when you think about what you're doing, when you build solutions, whether they be computer-based solutions or otherwise, your first order of business now is user experience and data collection. The only two things you should worry about, because you don't have to guess anymore. You have to test. That's all you do. Put it out there, test, collect data, put something else out there, test, collect data, put something else out there. Pivot, pivot, pivot. And again, someday you're going to walk out of the school here and you're going to think to yourself, what's the right move for me? And you're going to try to create a plan. I keep going back to, I wouldn't create a plan, I'd create a direction, and then ask yourselves, am I going to a place where I pivot, 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 pivot? Do I learn a little bit more? Am I at a place that allows me to learn a little bit more? Is it a place that's trying to learn a little bit more all the time? Let's see, I think I had one more. Let's see if I can bring this up for you, a little more video for you. Now, of course, I'm being excluded from your network, and all kinds of stuff is being launched on my computer. One sec more. By the way, apropos of this, and just to give you an idea of how embedded some of these companies that realize where this friction is, you just saw the Mac keyboard launch, where with a swipe-based keyboard. Has anyone not seen that? Oh man. You guys all use what's called a QWERTY keyboard. Do you know why the QWERTY keyboard is the way that it is? Why? Yeah, it's a mechanical engineering problem. Fast typists would type so quickly that the typewriter things would get stuck. So they tried to create a keyboard that was as inconvenient as they could, so that it would slow you down. That's your keyboard. Your keyboard is literally designed to be the worst keyboard it can be. Think about that, and think how long that experience has lived in the market. And only now is someone actually trying to, like, wait a minute, this is literally the worst product on the market. Maybe I should make it better. Did you have a question? Yeah.
So are there plans to make hybrid keyboards that are like the typewriters without arms?
So there is since mechanical has gone away, and this is completely on the digital side, they're now trying to figure out, and this is the big issue, their whole courses have been created around using this keyboard, right? It's so bad that schools created courses to teach you how to use this terrible thing, thereby instituting it further and further into the way that you do things. So there's a whole system around making sure this really bad thing continues to exist.
Haven't people been trying to make this shift for decades?
Yeah. And why don't they succeed? Because you've been trained to do this one thing, and you're addicted to it, and it's all the way back, by the way, to elementary school. My daughter in 5th grade is learning how to type on a QWERTY keyboard. It's really hard to break in. By the way, it tells you something else. When you do there are such things as high barriers to entry, and the keyboard business clearly is one of them. Do I what? So I do, but I will also tell you this. I don't type very much on a normal keyboard at all. I dictate a lot of stuff, though. I will walk around on my phone. I look like an idiot, but I mean, I will pull up a text message, and I speak into my text messages, because typing on a phone's interface is a terrible experience in and of itself, and I can talk real fast. So boom. I think in some respects it's kind of like, why would I deploy a landline internet connection when I have wireless in countries where they haven't dug up the earth to do this? They just go right to wireless and go right to voice. Natural language search is the future. So, in terms of what I advocate for you, then I'm going to talk a little bit about where I'm focusing and where I think the future is from a technology perspective. Know how to do this. Know how to do storytelling. Know how to market. Know how to create a great user experience. And as an individual, be resilient. You should read a book. There are a couple of books, one called Black Swan. It talks about, and there are a couple others by the same author that talk about things that survive over long periods of time are not actually great at what they do per se, but they're great at changing when the experience requires it. But for engineers, if you can't do the top things in this row, it's going to be more and more difficult, I think, for you to get jobs. I was mentioning earlier, I saw an amazing presentation by a former Harvard professor that now works for the San Antonio Spurs. You know the Spurs, the basketball team? And he worked in the only department in the last 100 years at Harvard that got closed. One department. And that department was cartography, map making. And this guy thinks that this was the absolute worst decision ever made by a university. And he kind of proves it, because when you get to the San Antonio Spurs, what he really is a data scientist. But what he points out is the problem with data science is not just that they can't predict an election, but it's also that that data scientists are so bad at presenting the data that while they have great conclusions, they can't convince anybody of anything. They're not illustrating the problem. People can't read it, understand it quickly, and take action on it. And cartography's whole job was try to take a complicated world and find many ways to sort of explain it to people who may never be able to see even a fraction of it. And so he goes through all the techniques that cartographers created over the years that are very relevant in data science today. But you would never think to take a cartography class, even though you might be working in a highly technical field like data science. But the reality is he's working for the San Antonio Spurs, having the time of his life as a deep-thinking data scientist, and gets paid a lot of money for it. If you were just a data scientist, he could be working anywhere in a cubicle that you never get to meet him. But he put the two skills together. He was resilient, They closed his department. He found something better because he learned these skills. It's very important for me, and maybe if you take anything away, take that slide away. So, where I am working. So I'm trying to look for where's the friction. And I do think the world where the friction is in data. We've spent a lot of time in infrastructure in the computer space. We built servers and first mainframes, then 10 years, you have mainframes for a long time. You built client-server environments. Client-server environments got virtualized. VMware, Hyper-V, things like that. Now it's going to containers and cloud computing, but it's really effectively the same thing. And applications have changed, whether it's I've coded them in Perl or C or Java, or I can write them in Python or Ruby. I can do whatever now, but it's still effectively the same. But the only thing you create these systems for is for data. You don't create applications for the application's sake. You're trying to find something out. Application is only a way of getting data from you and giving you data. That's it. But no one has ever liberated the data from the application. So if you're a company and you have 5,000 applications, which is not a lot of applications for some of the companies that I deal with, how do you find that data? It's in 5,000 applications, in 5,000 different storage containers, 5,000 different types of data structures. It could be in an Oracle database or a structured data source, or it could be on a file system, it could be a message, a chat, an email, it could be anything. Most of my data I don't see. I don't even know where it is. It's called dark data, by the way, in the industry parlance. And this is important for this reason. And I'm going to go back to why you need multiple skills. Google. And I've kind of led you into this, but I'll ask almost anybody, what's the most valuable asset that Google has? All right. Why do they do search? Okay, why do I give my ads to Google? Why do I pay for Google to present my ads? Because why?
Everybody sees them.
But be a little more specific. Everybody does. But if I just thought that everybody saw an ad, I wouldn't give you my ad.
Google can target your ads.
Because it has data about you. It knows where you are, who you are, what you bought last. It knows people like you, what you buy in the future. It tells you very specific things about people. Data. It has amazing amounts of data. Now I'm going to link to another skill that you may have not learned. I'm going to encourage you all to go learn. If you go to a company, you value a company. One of the tools that you use to value a company is called a balance sheet. Balance sheet, you take cash flows and you buy things, you put them on your balance sheet. That's how one of the major mechanisms, and without giving you a whole symposium on value and discounted value of cash flows and things like that, we'll just focus on this. Google, their most valuable asset is data. It does not get referenced on their balance sheet at all. Because accountants have not considered data to be an asset. But if you're an investor, and Google tomorrow woke up and deleted all of its data, what would happen to Google's stock? It would just be wiped off the map. Gone. So the most valuable thing it has, the thing that's the whole company is predicated on, has no value on its balance sheet. This is because accounting standards were created in the 1930s as a result of the Great Depression and mismanagement of those companies' representations of their finances. And they've been fairly consistent for the last 70 or 80 years. Meanwhile, lots of things have changed. And one of the things that obviously changed was we create an internet-based economy that's largely driven by data. And there's a significant group out there that predicts that data will appear on a balance sheet maybe around 2030. So think about you. So wait a minute. If all of a sudden this asset appears on a balance sheet and it now matters, now an investor is going to call up a company like GE or American Airlines. They're going to say, what are you doing with that asset? Are you using it enough? I mean, it's an asset here. Are you getting enough return on your asset? And if you're not, I'm going to discount your stock. I'm not going to give you my money because you don't manage your assets very well. Just like you wouldn't manage your plane as an asset or manage your buildings as an asset. So now these companies are going to wake up and say, oh my God, if I don't use my data asset more effectively, I won't get paid. I won't get funding. My value in the stock market will go down. Well, now we have friction. The friction is an investor says, you're supposed to get this kind of return on invested capital, and you're supposed to get this kind of return on assets that are the result of that capital. Over here, you have 3,000 applications with data that's all siloed, not integrated, and largely invisible. And that problem is getting worse. In 2016, there will be about 44 times more data generated than 2009. And while most of that data is generated by individuals, 80% of it will be stored by businesses and required to be stored by businesses. Or, in an interesting twist, required to be deleted by businesses. Well, it turns out one of the hardest things to do is delete data, because if you don't know what your data is, you don't know what you should delete and what you should save. So companies' history has been just save it. But now they're being told you have to delete it. In Europe, they just passed a law in May that said if you call up your local retailer and say, you have my data, you know my address, my cell phone, maybe my purchase history, I want you to delete it. I have a right to be forgotten. This is called GDPR, the data regulation. If you're that business and you've never organized your business this way, you know who's struggling with this? Google. Google didn't create a system to forget people, it created a system to remember them. But now they have to reverse the whole thing. There is so much friction in the data space that has nothing to do with applications and nothing to do with infrastructure, and it's not in cloud computing, and it's not in Internet of Things, it's none of those things. There's a body of work out there called the third platform. This is the idea that we should be able to look at data without having to worry about any underlying applications or any underlying infrastructure at all. To do that, think about lessons past. If I have to know where my data is across different applications, and I have to know where your data is too, and other there should be standards. What's the standard for knowing what data? What's the standard for inventory data? I don't know. Needs to be one. There will be somebody out there right now is creating universal data classification. But if we all know what data we have, then we want to share it. Someone out there is going to create how to share data independent of an application. There is a whole world that is going to emerge driven by the basics of finances and then facilitated by technology, where companies will learn how to use the vast majority of the data that they don't even understand they have for productive purposes. If I am going into the job market right now, this is where I'm going. And I put my money where my mouth is. This is where we are investing. This is where we have thousands of people figuring out how do we become the company that allows our customers, and our customers are the largest companies in the world, the largest telecommunications, the largest banking, the largest retail, figure out how they take 50 years of data that was created in all kinds of different technologies, pull it together, govern it, regulate it, share it, monetize it. It's a huge market opportunity. It's what's coming. We had this little, promotional video here, but it'll give you an idea.
Information. It is likely the lifeblood of your organization. Seriously, it's probably your most valuable asset. The irony is, storing ever-growing mountains of it is also one of your organization's biggest expenses. Sure, you might think cloud storage is a great way to reduce the cost of storing all of that lifeblood, but think again. Blindly putting data you know very little about into the cloud can be a worse decision than wrestling a mama bear, while smeared with honey, holding a salmon, precariously standing on the edge of a cliff. Hey, what if I told you that upwards of 2/3 of your data has no value at all? And in the last 3 years, you haven't even touched 41% of it. Not to mention, 54% of your data is dark, meaning you have absolutely no idea what it even is. What would you say to all of that? That maybe you can't tell the treasure from the trash? Well, that's where Veritas comes in. At Veritas, we help you understand your data better, so you can make better.
I'll spare you the advertisement, but you get the idea. So anyway, upshot, you can have a plan. It's about skills diversity. I would not have a plan for an end state if I'm sitting in your chair. I'd have a plan for looking at what I'm good at and then pushing myself to find the thing that I'm not good at and spend my next 2 years doing that thing. And then 2 years later, I would do the exact same thing. And then 10 years later, when you are the most qualified, interesting, and insightful person that a company can hire because you can do it all, that's when you can build a plan. Because companies will kill for people like you. On the other hand, if you're the most expert person in one thing, you can be the best at it and do really well. And then you can be the 99.999% of the people that aren't that one person. And maybe not as meaningful, maybe not as fulfilled, not as interested, not given as many opportunities. And then in terms of I look, where that future is, it's a data-driven world. Infrastructure and optimizing infrastructure is a relentless commodity cycle. People really want data. Companies that have focused on data obviously have become very successful, but they haven't solved the problem. So I'll give you a little balance there. So I'm going to stop. Maybe I've asked some questions along the way, which I've appreciated. Shoot.
So speaking of resilience, how would Veritas compete with any other company? Let's say Google opens up a data organization company. How would you compete with it, and how would you, secure the stock of all your stock?
That is a sophisticated question. We are owned by a PE, by the way, so we aren't public and worry about a stock right now. We eventually will. But I will say this. The question was, if Google pivots and decides to be in our business, right? I mean, the reality is that most companies, while diversifying, can't do everything that they could do, right? They can't do that simultaneously. And most companies today, unlike, do you know what trust busting was? Have you learned that in a history lesson somewhere, right? So if you think back to like Standard Oil, and what they did is they took all the things to make oil, right? The shipping, the extraction, the refinement, and they said, I'm going to own it end to end, and I'm going to be the biggest, baddest company in the world. And eventually the government came in and split them up. Most companies today only grow when they are that word I keep using, when they are a platform for others to use them. Google doesn't want to compete with everybody. Google wants to facilitate everybody. They want everyone to find value in Google's technology and then do their own thing, using it as its basis. We're largely the same from a data perspective. So I'm not worried about Google getting our business. In fact, I did a presentation with a person that runs alliances at Google, and if you go to Google and Google Veritas now, you will find how we're helping them for customers moving into their cloud manage that data, because they can't do everything. We have 30,000 customers in business. They have very few, frankly. They have a lot of us, but they don't have business customers. So there's a lot of ecosystem development. There's a lot of platform development that makes these companies successful. But is there a risk that someone does what we're doing? Absolutely. And if my engineers don't show up to work every day feeling panicked, then I haven't done my job. Appropriately panicked.
Yeah, hi. I'm just curious. You are basically collecting a lot of data and using it to monetize and go out there, but what are you guys doing to protect it? I mean, you hear every day that you've identity theft and other stuff out there. So, I mean, how hard is it to maintain a server and keep everything protected?
Our primary business, as much as I talk about the future, is data protection, interestingly. So we have a $1 billion business that does just that. And that is a very difficult thing to do. It's not per se because you maintain a server, but because keeping the data in one place and encrypting it is exactly the opposite of what companies need to do. They need to use it. They need to share it. They need to move it. And when you do, that's when the risk comes in. And there's a lot of, and by the way, we are not a cybersecurity company, and I will not profess in any way, shape, or form to be a cybersecurity expert, or I won't even try to be knowledgeable. What I will say is this: where we focus is not on the bad guys stealing your data. We very much focus on the use. We focus on, as it turns out to be, complicated problems of what if your data were to go away? Like, how do you restore that data? Where do you get it from? How do you move it so that an application never goes down? you guys don't experience things that problems we've solved along the way. You know, application outages, like when you go to an application on the internet and it's like gone, and then it comes back 3 hours later, that was the norm like 10 years ago. Like now that never happens. Nobody's application's off the internet. I mean, it just does not happen. We focus on when you use the word protection, we focus on the protection of keeping applications running, keeping data available, putting it in the right place so you have the least latency to get access to that data, moving it globally. Cybersecurity is its own specialization, very complicated space that also is facing its own challenges, high publicity space as well. I won't even comment there. Thanks for the question.
So you talked a little bit about your path to CPO. What's your day-to-day look like as a CPO at Veritas?
This is going to terrify you. I get up at 5 in the morning every day, including Saturdays and Sundays, because that's the only time that I can catch up from the work that I didn't get done during the week before my kids get up. But it's a good question, and I tell you for this reason. The big difference between what I do now and what I did 10 years ago is that my job is focused on two things almost exclusively, and it's a weird feeling. Those two things are getting our message out to our constituents, customers, partners, analysts, whatever, and mentoring and encouraging people. Those are almost the only two things I get to do. I don't get to do much aside from that. In fact, it's a good question because I work with people that never make that pivot because they just can't, and especially engineers, by the way, who have gotten so used to their careers creating things. And I'm not even encouraging them to not do that. But there is a point in your career where you will realize that you have a fork in the road. And one fork is, I'm really good at creating things, and that gives me confidence and joy, and I keep doing it. And then the other one tends to be a different type of executive path where it is, I'm going to take my hands off of it now, and I'm going to spend all of my time showing other people how to do just that. And there are great career paths for both. I focus on the latter one. I could break it down into more mundane things, but that's what I try to spend my time on.
So you say storytelling is a good trait. What are some ways to become a better storyteller? What are some,
Man, and if I could answer that question. So there are basic ways. You can remember this term, SIPAB. Situation, complexity, implication, position, action, benefit. If you're not a natural storyteller, if you can construct a story around what's the situation today, what's complicating that thing, what's the implication of that complexity, what position do I take, what action should you take, and what benefit will you get, you'll generally create a compelling message. You won't go too far off the rails. You may not be exciting, but you won't go too far off the rails. Second piece of advice is this. And this is something I think you have to train yourself to do. And by the way, I keep a file. I'll explain in a second. But learn how to use metaphors, which is why I keep talking about diversity. I can pick a story from anything and apply it to computers. Anything. Run flat tires, David and Goliath, a guy sitting at a bar. I have so many, Miracle on 34th Street. I have a file where I literally collect stories for the purpose of saying, what's the meaning of the story? Like, what's the story actually telling me? And then I think, well, what's my talk going to be about? And I pick two of those stories and I apply them. But it doesn't come like it's preparation. It goes back to my slide. And when you do that over and over and over again, you get better and better and better at it and more comfortable with it. It's at least a hint. It's a lot of work, too. Shoot.
My question was, I guess, not off topic all the way, but kind of off topic.
but they can't
pretty
hear you.
much when the election happened, Canada's site crashed, and I was just curious, like, how
The immigration site you're referring
yeah,
to.
the immigration site crashed, and I was like, how does the site crash? Like, I didn't even know like it would crash, and it was just because they said it was because there's so many users going up on it. I was wondering if you could explain that for me.
From a technology point of view?
Yeah, from a technology point of view.
So I'm gonna go back to my advice over here on metaphor. Okay? You see the door that's open over there? That door is designed to allow two people to go in or out at the same time. And if we all decided to get up right now and we all had to be out of here in the next 10 seconds, do you know how many people would get out? None. 0 probably would get out, by the way. 0. And so what happens is this. 3 people or 4 people go to the door, just like 4 people go to Canada's website to go get a connection made. The server basically says, I'm going to try to service that connection, but I'm going to service this other one, but I can't finish with this one. I'm going to try to get this one. And there's a third one coming in, oh my God. And it doesn't complete any of them. So now it's holding on to these connections, and it can't let go of them all because people keep clicking the button on the other end, but it can't finish one either. And since it can't finish one, it can't release it to go do another thing. And it just sits there like this. Did that give you an answer? I didn't know I was going to be quizzed today. That was... No worries. By the way, you learn that skill when you have customers paying you a lot of money every month and their website goes down, and you do have to show up and say, hey, look, you have 1 door. You need to buy like 5 more doors.
I think we have time for one more question.
Not about web servers, I hope.
No, definitely not. So you're one of the better speakers we've had, and I
Hey,
just
thanks.
wanted to know. Yeah, I just wanted to know what's your key to captivating the audience and keeping us all, enticed in what you're saying.
Oh, you didn't find the beer under your chair? No, honestly, thank you for the compliment. Teach high school. Keep a list of stories. Know your audience a little bit. Move. There's basics, right? I don't know if you noticed, but you spend a lot, like when you do what I do a lot, you spend a lot of time doing this. And I do a lot of things for like 1,000 people, and it's hard to make a connection with 1,000 people. Show things people want to see. My last thing for my company, the entire background was, do you remember the movie from Pixar, with the Let It Go and Frozen? I did a whole speech on data storage through the characters of Frozen. Think about how crazy that is. It's not. Your brain, Pixar, right? That Frozen movie? Not Frozen, I'm sorry, gosh. Inside Out. Inside Out. I was watching Dancing with the Stars last night, and the singer from the Let It Go thing was one of the judges, so it was on my mind. But Inside Out. And Inside Out, basically your brain is a storage structure with a control center. And your data center is nothing more than that. And so people are like, wow, that was really neat. And I'm like, not really. It's, all we did was try to replicate brains and then just presented the brain, and you thought that was original. It's not. But, you can do that. Be a little self-deprecating. Practice. Yeah? Good? Thank you for spending your time with me.